The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I was watching the Democratic debate last night, which was a joint debate between CNN and Spanish language network Univision, when a Mexican-American teen came out to sing the national anthem. And I just knew that the internet racists and the nativists and the xenophobes were going to go nuts over it, and they absolutely did. I thought that there were some really great things actually done at yesterday's debate, one of which was incorporating the Spanish-English dynamic to it. What I think wasn't done very well was I put on CNN and the anchors started speaking in Spanish, and of course being fluent in Spanish I thought fantastic, and immediately there's like a live translation in English, but they're both at the same volume, so I couldn't hear either of them. So then I said, okay, I'll switch to Univision. But on Univision, when the candidates answered in English, there was the exact same thing with the live voiceover translation into Spanish, and the volume levels were just so similar that you couldn't hear anything.
That's strange. That's bad production. I mean,
Yeah.
I know I'm in production. You just can't do that.
Lewis is in production, and he would never have allowed that to happen, I can assure you. So anyway, back to this kid. 15-year-old Sebastian de la Cruz comes out to sing the national anthem. He's done the national anthem before at sporting events, etc. Here are some of the tweets that we saw in reaction to this. And, okay, we have that off screen. I'm not actually... Something like, God, the guy who sung the national anthem looked like the Frito Bandito.
Yeah, that's what that one says.
Okay,
yeah.
we have another tweet here to show you. It's our national anthem, and you should be treated with respect. How would you like it if I sing La Cucaracha in my Uncle Sam suite? I assume that this individual named Veterans for Truth meant my Uncle Sam suit. Another tweet that went out about Sebastian de la Cruz last night made sort of just fun of the way he was wearing, and just all of these people very angry about this individual, this 15-year-old kid singing the national anthem. The actual backstory is that from the time he was about 11 or even a little younger, he's been doing the national anthem at everything from sporting events to who knows what. And every single time, Lewis, the racists come out and they say, why is this Mexican kid doing this? Look at this little Mexican. And by the way, saying much worse things than this. I'm not going to repeat some of them. And the most amazing thing is we're talking about an American. This is an American kid. I'm going to play for you just 20 seconds of an interview he did after the blow up when he sang the anthem for the San Antonio Spurs, I believe it was, in Texas. Listen to this.
They don't know my life. My father was actually in the Navy for a pretty long time, and I actually salute him today for that. And I just want to thank him. And just to be able to sing the national anthem, people don't know. They just assume that I'm just Mexican. But I'm not from Mexico. I'm from San Antonio, born and raised, true San Antonio Spurs fan.
Yeah, so as you can see, Lewis, this is an American, right? And this is the problem, that those who call this kid anti-American don't have the sense to realize that they or their parents or their grandparents or whoever were like this kid at some point. I mean, remember when Italian immigrants came to the United States and they were not considered white, they were not considered American, or Irish. Irish came to the United States, and here in Boston, they were not considered white. The lack of context is stunning.
Yeah, it's just really latent white nationalism.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really all it is. It's and I'm sure to those people right now, if you were to tell them that about the Irish, they would think it's ridiculous.
Right.
But because now it's more about the color of your skin rather than just the country you're from.
No question about it. But the funny thing is, to a certain extent, with Italians from certain regions of Italy or Irish from certain parts of Ireland, it was a skin thing. It's just that we've now decided those skin things are part of what we broadly consider white culture in the United States. And again, we're talking about an American born in the United States singing the national anthem. Apparently his name and his skin color and what he was wearing made him somehow anti-American. And this is the attitude of too many Trump voters and too many right-wingers, broadly speaking. And they seem to forget their own families, in many cases, would have been part of these same groups that they now are saying don't represent America in some arbitrary way. One thing I want to talk about from yesterday's joint Univision-CNN debate was Hillary Clinton being confronted by Univision reporter Jorge Ramos about whether she would drop out of the presidential race if she was indeed indicted for the email server thing. I don't even know to call it a scandal at this point, because it really doesn't appear like it is a scandal. And I have already spoken about the sort of live translation confusion that was going on during this debate, and that really wasn't good. But one of the fantastic things about this Univision debate were the follow-ups and the second request for an answer. There were many initial questions, Lewis, where the candidate, both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, would not really answer the question. And then the anchor would just immediately say, okay, the question was, and restate the question. And usually the candidate still wouldn't answer, but it would get much more interesting. So here is the response from Hillary Clinton. She was initially asked, would you drop out of the race if you were indicted for your involvement in the private email server? She didn't answer, and we will hear the moderator, Jorge Ramos, asking it again. And here is Hillary Clinton's answer.
I am not concerned about it. I am not worried about it. And no Democrat or American should be either.
The questions were, Secretary Clinton, the questions were, who gave you permission to operate? Was it President Obama?
There was no permission to be asked. It had been done by my predecessors. It was permitted. I didn't have to ask anyone.
If you get indicted, would you drop out?
Oh, for goodness, that is not going to happen. I'm not even answering that question.
People are killing her for this answer, Lewis. There's no other way to answer that question. Whatever your opinion of Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or of Democrats or of Republicans or Cruz or Rubio or Kasich or of Vermont Supreme or whoever, whatever opinions you have about this presidential race, if she's asked, will you drop out if indicted, and she says, yes, I would, that means you're acknowledging indictment is a real possibility. It makes you look very, very bad. If you're asked, if you're indicted, will you drop out, and you say, no, I wouldn't, you look terrible because you're basically saying, even in the face of criminal accusations, I would not drop out. It's not even clear she would be allowed to be the Democratic nominee if she were under indictment. It's a separate thing. But I don't think there is any other answer to this question than the one she gave.
I think there is. And that is saying, yeah, sure. But you have to follow it up. You have to say, sure, I'll drop out if I get indicted because I'm that confident that there isn't going to be one. There isn't going to be an indictment. I mean, I think that that's better than saying no.
The main point, though, is that she doesn't believe there's going to be an indictment, or at least until there is one, it's not something she's going to talk about. The FBI has been looking into whether any classified material was mishandled during her tenure at the State Department, involving in part this private email server, but it's not even clear that Hillary Clinton is a target of the investigation that the FBI has acknowledged doing. Hillary Clinton being indicted is a very, very long shot. And as hard as Donald Trump would go against Hillary, if they are the two nominees, Trump's threats or claims that she might be under indictment by the time the primary is over, if I say today that is just not going to happen. She is not going to be indicted.
Yeah, I really doubt it. I mean, never say never, but highly unlikely.
I think it was absolutely the right answer in the context of the debate. I'm not going to answer because it's not going to happen. Send me your thoughts on that. Was there a better answer? And please try to separate yourself from any specific opinions for or against Hillary or Bernie or whatever. Was there really any other answer to the question? I think the criticisms of Hillary for that answer are absolutely off base. There's a new Wall Street Journal NBC News poll which indicates that 1/3 of Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders supporters cannot see themselves voting for Hillary Clinton in November. This could be a huge deal. We've been talking about this for weeks now, Lewis. We talked to voters about it last week. We've heard from our audience via voicemail, and there are people who say if Hillary Clinton, there are Bernie supporters who say if Hillary Clinton is the eventual Democratic nominee, I am not going to vote for her. And indeed, there is this new poll which says about 1/3 of Bernie supporters will not vote for Hillary Clinton if she is the eventual nominee. Those individuals overwhelmingly cite trustworthiness as the issue that for them makes Bernie Sanders the more attractive candidate than Hillary Clinton. We need to distinguish a few things here. First of all, there's a difference between Bernie supporters saying they will not vote for Hillary Clinton and Bernie supporters not voting for Hillary Clinton. I think that there are it is very much believable to me that today there are many Bernie supporters who feel like they would not vote for Hillary Clinton in November if Bernie Sanders doesn't win. But once it comes down to it, and it's November, and it's Hillary versus Cruz, if that's what it ends up being, or Hillary versus Trump, or Hillary versus Romney, or whoever, right? That they're not going to go out there and vote for Romney, or particularly if you're in a swing state, vote for a third-party candidate if your vote actually has a shot at making a difference in the outcome of your state. I think there's a big difference, Louis, between those who in March say they would not support Hillary and those who in November actually would not support Hillary.
Well, it's also possible that they may have already decided that if that is the outcome, if it's Hillary versus whoever, that they may just not vote at all.
I just don't think so, because primary voters are some of the most highly engaged voters. Primary voters almost always vote in the national general election. Now, there's another issue I want to bring up, which is that there is something Hillary Clinton could do if she were the nominee to secure a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters.
Yeah.
And that is to run with Bernie Sanders as her vice president. We don't know if Bernie Sanders would accept. When he was asked if he would accept being Hillary Clinton's running mate, he said, I would consider running with her if she would be willing to be my vice presidential nominee. So that is something that absolutely would bring a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters over to Hillary Clinton if you believe this will be a problem. However, typically, two Northern Democrats aren't seen as the best ticket here. And although Obama from Illinois and Biden from Delaware has worked out pretty well for the Democratic Party, typically the idea is if you are the former senator from New York, you're not going to get the Brooklyn-born Vermont independent Democratic Socialist guy to run alongside you. But admittedly, everything is different this time around. The term Democratic Socialist is not nearly as negative of a term as it has been before. And Bernie Sanders is appealing to whole new swaths of voters.
Yeah, I think Bernie Sanders as president with Hillary as a VP would be a better ticket. Well, not just because of policy. I mean, better chance of winning than the other way around. And I don't think it's going to happen. Although, I mean, what could Bernie really do as a VP? I mean, would he really be trying to actively push his ideas through? Is Hillary going to go along with his ideas and try to push them through?
But the issue is, would his supporters go over if he is the VP nominee?
I'm sure at least some would.
Yeah. Last thing on this. I don't think Bernie supporters are this stupid, because if you truly believe in Bernie's cause and not just the sort of idea of Bernie Sanders and the cult of personality around him, you have to understand that a Democrat in the White House in 2016, even one as moderate as Hillary Clinton, is much, much better than letting the Republican Party control Congress and the presidency and possibly 1 to 4 Supreme Court nominations, which could change the country for decades to come. If you understand Bernie Sanders and his cause, if you remember the incremental approach of Ted Kennedy, of always choosing the best option that is out there to get us closer to what we want, there is no moral way that as a Bernie supporter, you do anything that would make it possible for Donald Trump, or Ted Cruz, or Marco Rubio to select Supreme Court nominees, because that is decades of impact, Louis.
It's terrifying to think about, yes. And so I think many of the people who did say they won't vote for Hillary will probably come to their senses. But
still a race to be run.
There's still a race to be run. Yeah.
Am I off on something here? I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. I'm ready for your comments on this if you think I'm leading you astray.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Roger Keyes. Roger, thank you so much for signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. This is independent, viewer-supported media. We exist because of your support. We have the bonus show and the commercial-free audio feed and the commercial-free video feed and the members-only town hall meetings with Lewis and with me and so many other great member benefits. You must be a member, though. davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. And a big thank you to Roger Keyes. He is today's member of the day. And of course, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, first go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. And then all of the shopping you do will support the work that we do here on the show. I have a great recommendation for you today. A few friends suggested I check out the documentary, The Search for General Tso. And part of the documentary actually is it General Tso or Tsao or Chow or Cho and all of the different iterations of it. General Tso's chicken, of course, Lewis, a staple in American Chinese cuisine. I guess Chinese American cuisine or Americanized Chinese cuisine.
Right.
The film is fascinating. They start out saying, who is General Tso? Why do we have this dish called General Tso's chicken, which involves this sort of breaded fried chicken? It includes a history of Chinese immigration to the United States and the history of why Chinese restaurants became a thing and how they became so popular. Then they actually include going to China and going to Hunan province, where General Tso, at least early in the film, I won't give it all away, early in the film is portrayed as having been from. And they start asking people, does this dish look familiar to you? They show people photos of General Tso's chicken. And they ask people and investigate the history of General Tso. It's absolutely fascinating. And everything about how, the Chinese food culture of the United States in and of itself is absolutely fascinating, right? The connection to Jewish Christmas, right? And involving this tradition for many American Jews of going to Chinese restaurants on Christmas. So many elements that are fascinating, and I couldn't recommend this more highly.
Yeah, it has been recommended to me many months ago, and
Right.
I haven't got around to seeing it. I must say, Dave, that while I try not to eat too much of it,
Yeah.
it's a delicious dish.
I don't know that I've had General Tso's chicken for years. I tend to avoid the sort of breaded Chinese chicken dishes.
Yeah.
I tend to go with, if it's a Chinese American menu, chicken and broccoli or chicken with mixed vegetables, chicken and garlic sauce, chicken and black bean sauce, et cetera. The non-breaded chickens. Of course, sesame chicken is an old classic, and who doesn't love sesame chicken?
Orange chicken.
It's been a very long time since I've had it. Orange chicken, sweet and sour chicken. There's so many great options. Although recently, I will say, and we're sort of getting off track here, but I think the audience this is an issue of paramount importance. I've been going towards the restaurants that have what they describe as the authentic Chinese menu, where you have a whole other variety of dishes.
Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, that's I prefer that.
Yeah.
And we have Chinatown here in Boston, and that is a great place to do that. And you can get many parts of the animal you won't find at your standard American local Chinese place.
Do you find that your preferences with Chinese food tend towards more the recipes of the Szechuan style or Hunan?
Szechuan.
Really?
Definitely. I love the hot pots. I just I love that style of food, and it's still a bit harder to find, but once you find it, you find a good place. It's great.
Well, that may come as a shock to many in our audience, but Lewis preferring the Szechuan style recipes when it comes to Chinese food. Again, the film is The Search for General Tso. It is listed along with all of my other recommendations at davidpakman.com/recommendations. Okay, really big story out of Ohio. March 15th, next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, we have the Republican and Democratic primaries in Ohio. In December, Secretary of State John Husted issued a directive, and there wasn't much notice about it, although it changed the rules around whether 17-year-olds are allowed to vote in the presidential primary in Ohio. This is really, really important. The rule was, and has been for a while, that if you're going to be 18 years old on the day of the general election, right, in November 2016, that you can vote in the primary in spite of only being 17 years old. And the logic makes sense, right, Lewis? If you're going to have a say in November, then you should have a say in terms of who is on the ballot in November. You're not going to be more than a year away from your 18th birthday. That's the way it's been. John Husted has now issued a directive changing this, saying you're not really nominating, right? The rules are you're allowed to participate in the nomination process at age 17. John Husted says you're not really nominating when you vote in the primary. You are actually electing delegates who then go to the convention and nominate. And this is a technicality, but it is of huge importance because the spirit of this is, yes, you are technically designating delegates to go and make the nomination, but really you're voting on the nomination of your party's candidate. This is, of course, huge for Bernie Sanders, who is depending on the young vote, particularly in a state like Ohio. So huge controversy, and Bernie Sanders is suing. Bernie Sanders is suing over this.
And he should. This is not a coincidence, right? I mean, I think it's pretty clear. I wouldn't call this conspiratorial, that this is a move to try and make sure that Hillary comes out with more votes. That's obviously what this is.
Meanwhile, 17-year-olds in Ohio should go ahead and vote. I mean, show up on Tuesday because your votes may well end up getting validated by the courts after the fact. You will be given a paper ballot. It will be treated as provisional until this is all settled. So if you're a 17-year-old in Ohio and you've heard about the rule change, go and vote whoever you're voting for, right? I mean, you will likely be allowed to vote if this ends up going the way that those in favor of increasing voter turnout want this to go. You will be given a paper ballot. It will be provisional, and this is going to be worked out. By the way, the state Secretary of State's website hasn't even been updated. It still says if you will be 18 on or before the day of the general election, then you can vote in the primary. That's still what it says. Show up with a printout of that.
Yeah. Right now, it seems like it's just, I guess it hasn't been enacted yet. So, sure, show up.
There has been a release of some really depressing pictures from a stadium rally in Marco
funny?
Rubio's home state. It is funny. Depressing and funny. Home state of Florida. We've talked about how Marco Rubio may not even carry his home state of Florida in next week's Republican primary election. He gave a rally at what I guess he hoped would be friendly and boisterous territory for him, and not many people showed up. The picture that's on the screen behind me is sort of framed and zoomed in a way where it's at least possible that there's a big crowd here, but actually it was very, very far from that. Talking Points Memo posted a picture, which I'll show you now, which, as you can see, shows this huge stadium. There's not a single person in the bleachers. There's barely anyone on the field. And you basically have a crowd that Jason Carroll from CNN, I believe, described as a couple of hundred supporters not even filling the end zone. This is his home state of Florida, Lewis. And then the Washington Examiner's Byron York posted another image from the event.
This one really shows you what it's like.
This really shows you the sort of sad nature of this. And this may be a strategic mistake, right, Lewis? I remember when I went to a John Kerry event in Massachusetts, in Northampton, Massachusetts, and they were holding the event at a restaurant called the Sierra Grill, a popular restaurant.
Yep.
And I said, wait a second, John Kerry's coming here. John Kerry's hugely popular. This thing is going to be absolutely packed. Why would you have such a small venue? And every political person I spoke to there said, no, you want a small venue. You want to turn people away because there isn't room. You want to say you can come in, but you have to stand at the back and, by the way, hold this sign. Because the worst possible thing in politics is a room that isn't full. And this just a complete strategic mistake on Marco Rubio's behalf, apparently expecting somewhere around 10 to 20,000 people to show up instead of 200.
Yeah, I suppose it just was a mistake by the campaign, of which there have been many as
Yeah.
of late.
Dousing himself in water, another problem, but maybe not a campaign problem, maybe just an issue of Rubio's thirst. But I want to say here, Lewis, I am praying, and I am not a religious person, I am praying that Marco Rubio stays in this race. It's bad. It's bad in his home state of Florida. In the latest poll from Florida, he's down 43 to 20, in second place at least, but down to Trump 43 to 20. We need him to stay in as long as possible to try to make it so the end result is a Republican convention choosing Ted Cruz as the nominee, leading Donald Trump to flip his lid and run as an independent. Maybe Democrats need to start thinking about, in open primaries, voting on the Republican ticket for Marco Rubio because we need him in there.
Well, maybe. But as we've seen, there have been some very close races in the Democratic primary. So let's be careful about that. But if anything, I would like Marco Rubio to stay in so we can see more pictures like these.
We also need to remember that there's this sort of crazy situation where if you say to me, David, if a Republican were definitely going to be the next president, would you rather it be Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio? Obviously, I would rather it be Marco Rubio. He is by far the most reasonable of the three candidates that remain here. I mean, Donald Trump is running just a phony, authoritarian, crazy campaign. It's all nonsense. Ted Cruz believes he was anointed by God to be president of the United States to bring about the second coming of Jesus Christ. Rubio, in that context, is by far the most reasonable guy. However, I still maintain that in a national election, in many ways, Rubio is very, very electable. So I don't know. It's really complicated right now for Democrats in terms of who they would rather face. And as a liberal independent personally, I want to set this thing up to give the most progressive candidate, who at this point is going to be either Bernie or Hillary, the best shot at winning this thing.
Yeah, and I don't have the answer either, right? Complicated.
All right, after the break, we will talk to Michael Moss, Pulitzer Prize-winning Michael Moss, about how processed food and food deserts are very much a class issue in the United States. It's going to be fascinating.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to have Michael Moss back on the program. He's the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us. Michael, last time you were on, we talked about salt and sugar and fat and how these have an impact on our tastes and our preferences. And today we're going to talk about the sort of class angle on processed foods. And on our program, we've talked about food deserts and areas of the country where it's actually very difficult to get fresh produce, where it's difficult to find mom and pop restaurants rather than chains that are sourcing their food from who knows where and giving you very processed versions of those mom and pop recipes in many cases. So lay out the sort of initial groundwork for us in terms of the different ways in which class and processed foods sort of interact.
One of the main ways, David, is that the people who engineer and invent the processed foods that we became so dependent on don't actually eat their own products. Often they have just one of a couple working outside of the home. The other can pay attention to making real food for their kids and healthy food. But also kind of in just the manner that they approach the creating of their products. It's telling to know that they don't even refer to them as food, but rather as products, as things that they engineer to be low cost, convenient, irresistible, but missing that key component, which is stuff that would make us healthy if we eat it, or unhealthy if we eat too much.
It's sort of been commoditized, right? I mean, you can really see the gap that's increasingly growing in terms of the sort of two tiers of food consumption, because when you look at, you know, in the grocery store, a way that it's often described as the sort of outer edges of the grocery store versus the inner aisles of the grocery store, the fresh foods, meats, dairy, etc., versus the processed foods. Those are sort of commodities where we're sort of trying to see, or we're seeing the big food companies try to eke out every penny possible of profit margin. It's being thought of in a completely commoditized way.
And they control the entire agricultural system that goes into creating the groceries in the grocery store. You don't have to go very far to see a food desert. We have them here in Brooklyn, where I live. You can find them in Los Angeles. But it really came home to me spending some time recently in Nebraska, where people are surrounded by agriculture, fields growing stuff, but not things that they can eat. The food that's typically grown there is field corn that's used for ethanol, for animal feed, for high fructose corn syrup. And people in Nebraska are literally starving for fresh vegetables and fruits, which would make them healthier. It's like being in a third world country.
It's fascinating. You know, you mentioned Brooklyn, where I lived for a couple of years up to a few months ago. You can see even in Brooklyn, which now has become one of the top 5 least affordable housing markets in the country, right? By and large, if you take a sort of mean of Brooklyn, it is very, very expensive and wealthy. But within Brooklyn, as you mentioned, you have the areas closer to Manhattan, right? Williamsburg and downtown Brooklyn and Brooklyn Heights, et cetera, where there's an abundance of artisanal kale shops, right? And the local, whatever, grass-fed raw milk, we'll call it what you want. And then you get further east in Brooklyn into East New York and some of the other neighborhoods, and you have a drastically different picture. And that's within one of the most urban, one of the most densely urban areas in the country.
Yep, and in those lower income areas, you're going to get a grocery store where the produce department is typically 10% of the store, with the rest of it being highly processed foods, but also really expensive. And that's one of the most sort of grievous aspects of our food system now, is that even if you walk into the store meaning to do well by your health, by your family's health, it's going to hit you in the pocketbook. That little basket of blueberries, especially shoulder season, is going to cost you as much as a 2-pound, 3-cheese, 4-meat frozen pizza that will feed the entire family. And so who's not going to go for the pizza when money is an issue in your life?
You talked about in Nebraska the field corn and the corn used for high fructose corn syrup, et cetera. This is sort of another way in which big corporations, big food corporations, run by, decisions made by those in the 1% or close to it, are sort of riding the government subsidies on certain foods, corn being sort of at the top of the list. And this is yet another way in which big corporations can sort of piggyback on government subsidies to make these processed foods even cheaper at their expense, which, as you mentioned, disproportionately appeal to the poor, don't they?
Yeah, but I think it's even more than government subsidies, because the largest seed companies will spend every year $2 billion of their own money on research and development to make that field corn or soybeans more attractive and profitable to farmers so they'll grow more. And those are the key ingredients on processed foods. $2 billion a year for that, compared to maybe $100 million a year on making all fruits and vegetables, including nuts, more profitable and attractive and easier for farmers to grow. That's a huge disparity in the investment that corporations are putting into the food system.
Is there some sort of general advice for individuals, sort of at a range, within a range of different income brackets, to try to improve their situation in terms of the relationship to processed foods? I mean, in some cases, when you're talking about food deserts, you can't just say, well, move somewhere else, right? I mean, it's just not really practical. So is there anything that the individual can do?
Sure. I mean, you can eat well in a typical grocery store by working a little bit harder and thinking about what you're going to buy and avoiding sort of buying too much junk. So, I mean, that's the first thing. You make a list before you walk in the door and stick to it, because everything about the store is designed to make you to buy compulsively. Pay some attention to the frozen aisle, because there actually you can find those blueberries flash frozen, locally grown at much lower prices throughout the winter and off season than you otherwise would. I'm a big fan of frozen fruits and vegetables as an economic way of eating well. And you can look for some canned foods that don't have a lot of added salt, where you can make your own food. I love canned tomatoes, for example. 5 minutes of time and a can of tomatoes will make you a spaghetti sauce that is tastier, less expensive, and with a bigger wow for your family than the canned and prepared sauces you can find in the grocery store.
I'm curious about this, and I'm curious what your sense of it is, because you now have reminded me of this issue. Frozen versus canned vegetables. I know people who say, David, it's all the same. If it's frozen or canned, it's really all the same. And more of what I'm reading suggests no, the flash frozen is actually far, far better than going with the canned vegetables. Is there a discernible difference here?
Yeah, I think you're right that the flash frozen done in the field, right, where the fruits or vegetables are immediately frozen without any delay, I think there is some science now showing that, yeah, those are going to pack more nutrients than perhaps a canned or more processed type of vegetable, or more even than a vegetable fresh that sits in your refrigerator for too long and loses its nutrients. But bottom line is, you want to eat healthier. You eat vegetables and fruits, no matter how they're processed or preserved or saved, it's going to help you.
Last thing I want to touch on, in the grocery store, you talked about the grocery store being designed to get you to compulsively buy. And some of these things I think we can sort of intuit naturally. You have to usually walk through the entire store to get those the items that you might just be going in for one item. Milk is one that comes to mind. We know about at the groceries, at the cash registers, rather, there's all these little items that are often a couple dollars, but we know that they have a very, very high profit margin, so that those are there to tempt you to pick them up as you're waiting in line. What are some other really specific ways that grocery stores are sort of designed in this very specific sense?
Besides the checkout lane, the parts of the aisles called the end caps, which are those things that stick out facing the large, walkway areas of the store, are the real grabbers. The store will typically rent out that space to food companies, knowing that we will pay more attention to, and buy items on those end caps. That's one of the biggest things.
All right, Michael Moss, the book, of course, is Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, Michael Moss. Thanks again for being on with us.
Great talking to you, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Gun-loving, social media activist, pickup truck driving 31-year-old mother Jamie Gilt was shot and wounded by her 4-year-old son while driving. The boy somehow managed to gain access to a .45 caliber handgun and shoot her from the back seat. The bullet passed through Gilt's torso, and she is expected to survive. She's from Jacksonville, Florida. She regularly posts online about her love of guns and her view on the Second Amendment and Second Amendment rights, as well as her support for none other than Republican presidential candidate Ted Cruz, as well as racist propaganda, which she seems to have since deleted from her Facebook page. She actually bragged the night before the shooting on Facebook that her, quote, 4-year-old gets jacked up to target shoot the .22, referring to a .22 caliber firearm, in response to her post suggesting that guns are a better response to a burglary than calling 911. She also apparently used to maintain a Facebook page called Jamie Gilt for Gun Sense, which was deluged with critical messages and now has been taken offline completely, Lewis. Yet another element of her social media presence that has evaporated into thin air, like the common sense she apparently doesn't really have around guns. The shooting is under investigation. Deputies say, as we often hear in these cases, there might be charges against Gilt for her role in not securing the firearm that was eventually used by her 4-year-old to shoot her. We heard from Captain Joseph Wells of the Putnam County Sheriff's Office saying, quote, "Those questions center around how is the firearm secured, where was it carried in the vehicle, and exactly how did the young boy come in possession of the firearm?" Lewis, a 4-year-old cannot be legally responsible for a gun. This woman is legally responsible for the gun. She needs to be charged. At the same time, this is Florida, so maybe they would see charging a 4-year-old as an adult as a sort of reasonable alternative here.
It wouldn't surprise me in Florida. I think what we have here is a very precocious child who decided that he needed to take his mom out before she shot him accidentally. This is negligence, of course. I hope that there are legal repercussions here. I would see this is one of those people who claims that they teach their kid all about gun safety.
Right.
Their kid is well informed. Well, no, this woman clearly did not do a comprehensive job.
It is horrible that these types of people exist, and there are obviously way more of these people in Florida, but even here in Massachusetts, these individuals exist. I mean, if you go 10 minutes outside of where the show started in Northampton, Massachusetts, or 20 minutes when there isn't traffic, I'll say, outside of Boston, where we are now, you will get the same type of sort of yokel haram, gun-worshipping, ammo-sexual type of stuff in smaller quantities. But this exists even in liberal old Massachusetts.
Everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It exists everywhere. You can find this in any state. You can probably find this in most countries around the world, too.
You might remember that our buddy Elizabeth Hasselbeck left Fox and Friends as one of the regular hosts of Fox and Friends. And as absurd as her presence was on that show, there's no shortage of insanity from the different replacements, including Ainsley Earhart, who have worked their way through Fox News' show Fox and Friends. And her co-hosts were sort of visibly confused when she said, after a piece about, they played a piece from a PBS show about actor Dustin Hoffman finding out that his ancestors, that is his grandparents, were concentration camp survivors from the Holocaust. And she came out and sort of very casually said, we can all relate to that. Now, she's getting killed for these comments, saying, what are you talking about? Your parents were, your ancestors were helping George. They knew George Washington, and they were like of the most privileged people we can imagine. What are you talking about? We can relate. And defenders of Ainsley Earhart are saying, well, she's just saying you can relate to the struggles and sacrifices of past generations. Let's take a look at the video and figure out whether this is offensive.
They don't know my life.
But
My
this is
father
not-
was
not
actually
quite-
in the Navy.
This is actually Sebastian Dela Cruz, the mariachi
That's not the
singer.
video we were looking for.
No.
Here we
Here
go.
is the actual video. Take a look.
Actor Dustin Hoffman breaks down as he learns his family's history. Listen to this.
People ask me today, what are you? I say I'm a Jew. They all survived for me to be here.
Wow, the 78-year-old Oscar winner barely keeping it together on the PBS show Finding Your Roots. Hoffman discovering that his great-grandmother survived a Russian concentration camp before she was able to start a life in the United States. His father had always kept a family history, or that family history, a secret, and that's how he was learning about it through the show and all the work that they're doing. Fascinating, and how emotional for so many families.
Powerful program.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
Heather,
really.
thank
See
you.
you soon, thanks.
We can all relate to that, though. I mean, you think about what your grandparents did to give you a better life and what your parents did to give you a better life. So, pretty remarkable.
It is indeed. All right. Meanwhile, torrential downpours leaving
So
millions
some
of people.
confusion on the faces there of Steve Doocy and Brian Kilmeade. Now, to be clear, it was his great-grandparents, and it was a Russian concentration camp, not a Holocaust concentration camp. So what do you think, Louis? I mean, is it just sort of out of place, right? It's not. What is Ainsley Earhart saying here? We can all relate to Russian concentration camps? I mean, certainly she can't. Or just this general idea that we can all relate to sacrifices of past generations?
I think that's what she was saying. I'm not going to jump all over her for this one.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think she meant that we can all relate to having ancestors in concentration camps. It was just an unfortunate choice of words, I guess.
What do you think of for people who didn't see this? I mean, how would you describe the looks on Steve Doocy and Brian Kilmeade's faces?
They are thinking that was a very unfortunate choice of words.
I actually don't know that it is that easy to really understand the sacrifices of past generations. I mean, beyond the generations you personally know or knew, or maybe one beyond that, it can be pretty tough. I mean, I sort of generally have a sense of the sacrifices that my great-great-great-grandparents undoubtedly made growing up as poor Jews in what now is Russia or Ukraine. But I don't really have a sense of it, right? I mean, conceptually, I do.
Yeah. And well, it's tough. It is tough. I mean, how can we really put ourselves in that state of mind and put ourselves in their shoes? I mean, for me, for my family, it was similar, right? Escaping Europe, coming to this country and living, a poor life to escape that. Certainly a sacrifice, right?
Right, no doubt about it. It's just a lot of interesting conversations, I think, coming from what was maybe just a dumb comment from Ainsley Earhart. I mean, she just seems generally clueless about most things that they talk about on that show. I don't know that she's more clueless on this issue than anything else. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a voicemail I received.
Hey, David and Lewis. This is homeless Daryl S. Doris calling to say hi. I found it very interesting on the show I heard today. I don't know if it was a new show or an old show because the radio just seems to play random shows of yours. But you were discussing marijuana use, and you said David, you said that the smoke bothered you, and I thought maybe you should try some edibles. And I noticed that Lewis seemed pretty hip to with the scene.
Yeah.
But that's the news from sunny California.
Well, listen, it's always fantastic to hear from homeless Daryl.
Yes.
We haven't heard from homeless Daryl for a long time. Now, to be clear, what I was saying wasn't that the smoke bothers me. I was saying when we talk about the benefits of marijuana, I'm not cheerleading the smoking of anything. Smoking anything is bad for your lungs. It's not that it bothers me. It's just smoking anything is bad. That's separate from the sort of medicinal effects of marijuana. But the big news is homeless Daryl is okay. And as you remember, Lewis, homeless Daryl had more adjectives before his name than even Kim Davis. Remember, bigoted, whatever account, Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis. It was like homeless, diabetic, scrub oaky, whatever Daryl in a ditch in California from a field or something like that, right? I mean, it was built up over time.
I know. We should have wrote it down at its peak. It is, Dave has had edibles before, and I'm big on edibles. Edibles, my favorite, and we're going to try and get Dave to eat more edibles in a not too distant future. Great to hear from Daryl.
On the bonus show today, we will follow up about yesterday's peeled oranges in plastic containers at Whole Foods story, which has absolutely blown up. I mean, it's crazy what's gone on with that story. We will talk about public vehicles adding "In God We Trust" as a motto, and we will talk about the olive oil shortage. Will this affect Lewis's plan to now bathe in olive oil? Lewis recently switching over to olive oil soap, but really thinking about taking the next step and taking the plunge literally and actually bathing in olive oil because he says it is so good for the skin. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.